I want to talk to you a little bit about high-functioning autism, which was previously referred to as Asperger's disorder. And I want to talk about the symptoms that somebody might present with, and then I want to talk about some of the differences between the sort of levels of autism that an individual can have. One of the most important things to say is there's not actually an official diagnosis of high-functioning autism. There is an umbrella diagnosis, which we call an autism spectrum disorder. And an autism spectrum disorder is characterized by certain criteria, but people can fall from the very severe end to the very mild end. And this is where I think a lot of the confusion comes in around the term autism and what it means. One of my first training experiences as a psychology intern was working with teenagers who at the time would have been diagnosed with Asperger's disorder and now would be diagnosed with high-functioning autism. And they were such a interesting, challenging, fun group to work with. And I think that understanding a little bit about how they present can be very helpful. So an individual with high-functioning autism may be able to function fairly well in society. Like, they're going to be able to hold a job. They're going to be able to do their basic life skills, like make themselves food, dress themselves, do personal hygiene. Those things are going to be no problem, or if they are a problem, a very slight problem that they can adapt to. The biggest difficulty that people with high-functioning autism have is around social interaction and communication. And this is where they are frequently labeled as quirky or odd. In the past, they might have been labeled as a nerd or a geek. There are certain behaviors and ways of speaking which are fairly distinct, and we're going to talk a little bit about those in the next segment. One of the main problems, as I mentioned before, that people with high-functioning autism struggle with is social interaction and communication. And these symptoms run the gamut from difficulty with reading social cues to difficulty with eye contact, as well as sometimes difficulty with perspective taking or understanding where another individual is coming from. And we're going to break those down a little bit. In terms of the first one, a social cue difficulty might show up as, I don't give you enough space. So not really understanding personal boundaries, maybe standing too closely to someone, maybe talking too loudly for the situation, maybe going up to somebody and saying, hey, this is my interest, and then monopolizing the conversation around a topic that they're really interested in or engaged with. And so understandably, people who aren't familiar with it might pull away or not be able to naturally interact as they might with somebody else who had these basic conversational skills. So these skills, which we call kind of social pragmatics, are a really key difference between somebody struggling with high-functioning autism and somebody who we would refer to as neurotypical. Some of the common behaviors you will see in somebody who has high-functioning autism are a difficulty with eye contact to the point that it's noticeable, as well as often a difficulty with small talk. So the sort of social niceties we use when entering into conversation with other people, asking about interests, saying, hey, how was your day? They may not necessarily have the innate ability to do that. And so one of the key interventions with people with high-functioning autism is teaching them social skills. So essentially training them to be able to recognize cues and to act in an appropriate way. And if this is done in a structured manner, it can be pretty effective. High-functioning people on the autism spectrum might exhibit other behaviors that would appear strange or odd from the outside. Some of these are like preoccupation with routine, engaging in certain repetitive behaviors. And this can be either for a calming effect or just because it's like this intense interest that they have in things. And this is, I think, one of the coolest things about people who present in this way is that when they are interested in something, they go into it 100%, and they will know more about it than probably anybody else you're going to run into except the people who are experts in that profession. And that's really cool to see how their brain works in that way, where it can just really delve into a topic. And I think, this has been sometimes portrayed like a very old movie, Rain Man, where the person was preoccupied with one particular thing and would talk about it over and over again. What I've seen is much more frequent is having a very intense interest in one area, and when that area is sort of exhausted, moving on to another area. So in kids, this might look like a period where, beyond normal childhood curiosity, they want to know everything about dinosaurs and all the names of dinosaurs and what dinosaurs look like and where they came from. And we're not talking just like Tyrannosaurus Rex or Stegosaurus. We're talking like this era, Precambrian era or Jurassic era, and this is the dinosaurs that would go with these. And the other thing that people on the outside sometimes find annoying is that because they have such an intense interest and preoccupation, they will correct people, even adults, who don't have the facts straight about these things. And 9 times out of 10, if you get corrected by somebody with high-functioning autism on their facts, they're going to be right. So that's an important tip to remember. Another really common symptom in people with high-functioning autism can be sort of a tendency to have sensory overload. So, for example, they might do okay in a regular school setting or a regular classroom, but when it comes time for the pep rally or the assembly, they can become super overwhelmed and shut down. Or an adult with high-functioning autism might be able to go to the grocery store, but if they're, in an area where suddenly a large crowd develops, they might be significantly distressed because, number one, it pushes them outside of their routine and comfort zone, and number two, just everything kind of coming in from their senses is on high volume. And so when this happens, sometimes you'll see behaviors that they might seem rude, they might even be aggressive at times. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that people with high-functioning autism are aggressive. I'm saying that if any human being feels trapped and in sensory overload, they might react by pushing somebody out of the way to get out of the situation. So this sensory overload is really important to think about when you're dealing with somebody or working with somebody and helping them to kind of structure their lives in a way that's going to allow them to be, as high functioning as possible. This last point I'm going to talk about in terms of high functioning autism is really around the misconception that's out there about individuals with autism not being sensitive or lacking empathy. And I think there is a distinction that needs to be made between having difficulty putting yourself in someone's shoes and imagining what their experience might be, which is empathy, and feeling hurt or sad or afraid when somebody else is in pain. And what I have seen is that for many people with high-functioning autism, while they may not be able to take the perspective of someone in pain, they are truly concerned when someone is in pain and they want to relieve that pain. And we do them a disservice by thinking this is something they're not capable of. So in terms of this empathy, sympathy debate, I think the most important thing to recognize is that because somebody may not be able to express an understanding of your experience, that doesn't mean that they can't feel for you in your experience. And there's a really interesting fact around people with high-functioning autism and something called mirror neurons. And so mirror neurons are these neurons in the front of our brain here, in the prefrontal cortex, that help us recognize and imitate behavior in others and pick up on emotions in others that we can see or relate to on a personal level. And what they've found is that in people with autism spectrum disorders, they have fewer mirror neurons than the neurotypical individual. Because of this perceived lack of empathy isn't really that. It's more of a neurotypical inability to perspective take in the same way as others. In this video, I tried to give you a general overview and snapshot of how somebody with high-functioning autism might present in the world. It was not exhaustive. I certainly didn't cover every symptom or every possible variation, but I hope you have a better understanding of what this might look like and some of the difficulties that somebody who has this difference might struggle with as a result of living in a neurotypical society. And I think that's a really important distinction.